portions, it would be a pretty big coincidence that the atmosphere at that moment was just like conspired in some way with the environmental parameters to like exactly match what you would expect from a globe Earth model. Did you consider it from that angle, so to speak?
I would have to go back and watch the video again, considering what you just said.
Mm.
To me, though, that's so different than the Andrew Malecki shot of Chicago from Michigan, and we've got a clear line of sight to the Chicago skyline, and yet we're told that it's a mirage because all of those factors just happen to work out perfectly at that particular time of the day to actually bring the skyline back up perfect, not part, but completely into view. So if we're going to
Mm.
special plead, if we're going to special plead one way, we can always special plead the other way. It seems very
Well,
convenient
I
that
don't think that's really special pleading. I'm just saying it's noteworthy, right? I wasn't throwing anything in your face, and I'm not saying you are. But I would, if you want to talk about the Chicago skyline, I would ask you about how, if you were to try to isolate the exact like variable, the exact governing like mechanism for our observation of a skyline, if it really is due to the curve of the Earth, or if it's due to the mirage, I would simply say, what if you were to consider the fact that sure the atmosphere changes, and you can have a mirage one day, and then the atmosphere is doing something else, and you don't have a mirage. And so, how is it that you're just ignoring the fact that there's still a curve there, whether there's a atmospheric effect or not? We could take both of these into consideration. We know the math; it's not hard, at least not when you have like a computer and a calculator and measurements. But you can take into consideration refraction and the curve and say what do you expect to see, and then you'll see exactly what you expect to see. I mean, I'm not really sure how the mirage is. What your point was with that?
And after this,
my
let me just
point
say,
was
Travis,
is
before you
that
respond, we're going to switch gears after you respond to this, Travis. So kind of make any points that you want to on this particular issue now.
okay. I suppose my response to that would be that the calculation for the curvature would eliminate the skyline from being seen at all from that distance. So
Okay.
it's convenient. It's convenient that the atmosphere would work in such a way to bring it actually back up into view. Whereas if you and I were standing on the shore of Michigan and we looked across and I saw the Chicago skyline, I would simply say, we see the Chicago skyline. That's it. I don't have to explain anything.
Okay. By the way, over 500 people are watching now, so good job. We're going to switch now and do the opposite of what we started out doing. And Dr. Kroon, we're going to let you give what you would consider your best proof that we are on a globe Earth, and let Travis respond or how he would fit that in with a flat Earth model.
Okay, so I got to try to pick and choose the best of modern science and observations on the spot. So gravity is a center-seeking force, and when an object obtains a sufficient mass based on a mostly rocky and metallic mixture, like a terrestrial planet like we're on, it will naturally form itself into a spherical shape. It's the most energy efficient shape. If there were any huge geometric distortions, any anomalies, any perturbations from a spherical shape, and gravity would equalize and evenly distribute those forces and pull it back into a sphere, excuse me. If it were rotating, for example, then that would be perturbation that would be an ongoing thing. So we have a slight bulge to the planet. It's very slight, so it's fine to call it a sphere. It's technically a oblate spheroid. You can observe the lunar eclipses, and the Greeks noticed that no matter the circumstances around any particular eclipse, lunar eclipse, the Earth's shadow is always circular, and the only way that's possible is if Earth is a sphere. I haven't heard any explanation at all from any flat earther that explains the lunar eclipses, or solar eclipses for that matter, the rotation of the night sky, the fact that you can only see certain constellations from the northern and southern hemisphere.
Let's take those points, those 3 points one at a time, Dr. Kroon, so we don't get lost in the back and forth. So we'll let him start with the gravity, and then we'll move to the eclipses. Is that fair?
Sure, yeah. 3 is good,
okay.
More than enough.
All right, Travis. How do you explain gravity?
Sure. I guess I'm supposed to ask him, right?
Ask him what?
Well, I thought I was supposed to respond to what he brought up. You're asking me a question?
No, I'm asking you to respond to what he just said about gravity. I just wanted to split them up into different, instead of asking them all at one time and letting you kind of respond to all the three of those points at once. We'll just break them up. So we'll start with gravity first.
Okay, so I have a question. I guess my question for you would be, what's your observation that gravity exists?
I'm not flying off into space.
Okay, so let's just stop. Let's just take it one. Yeah. That's great. That's one step at a time. And why would you be flying off into space?
I wouldn't, because there's gravity.
No. But you're saying that your proof of gravity is that you are not flying off into space. So if there weren't gravity, why would you be flying off into space?
Because I would have no force acting on me. I would just float. I'm not sure I follow. I would eventually make my way. I mean, space is a vacuum. Gravity is holding the atmosphere onto it. If you turn gravity off, and the fact that it's spinning too, don't forget that we would be thrown into space, and at a high speed, and the air rushing into space would pull us and a lot of stuff with it. That doesn't happen because gravity is holding it all onto the surface. It's constantly trying to pull everything to the center of the Earth, but the ground gets in the way, and so now we're stable. We could stand up on a solid surface and whatnot.
Okay, my answer to the fact that I'm not flying off into space is that we're not spinning, and there is no space. So my answer doesn't take into account gravity. So I have an answer for your observation. You and I have the same observation. We're standing together, we're talking about life, and you say, I think the reason why I'm not flying off into space is because of this force called gravity. And I say, I think that I'm not flying off into space because 1, we're not spinning, 2, there is no space. So where do we go from there? So again, my question comes back because all you're doing in one sense is arguing in a circular argument. That is, gravity exists because gravity exists. I know that gravity exists because it's working right now, but that's not proof that there's gravity. Okay, so is there another proof? Is there another proof for gravity that you might suggest?
So I would just recommend. I mean, there's no proof. It's just the wrong word. You can measure it, you could study it, you could do all manner of experiments and measure how it behaves. It's a real force. It's a pervasive force. It explains the structure of the universe, galaxies, solar systems, stars. It's not a presupposition. It's not circular reasoning. It's not a proof. It's a measurable, observable, physical force of nature. Okay.
Okay. What's one way we can measure gravity?
Cavendish experiment.
Okay, what's the Cavendish experiment? What can you show me that in nature?
What do you mean in nature?
Well, it's a man-made experiment, yes.
No,
Are there
man
any other
doesn't make
kind?
gravity. There's We can design experiments to test forces of nature that are already there. I don't know what do you mean. What do you mean man-made? Man-made
Okay, well,
experiments?
what was it that made him build this contraption of determining gravity? So so my question is, what was his natural observation that he observed, and then he said, well, I'm going to test this out and make this contraption that's going to now measure this thing. So what was his naturally observed phenomenon that he witnessed in this world before he built his contraption?
You're asking me for something that I couldn't know. What do you mean? Like what happened in his life? Did he probably saw the moon? We saw an apple fall. I know that's the Newton's story, but he's like, hey, does mass really have this innate force that it exerts on all other things with mass? Like I don't see how it's relevant why he was inspired. Like he woke up one day and wanted to test it. It doesn't matter. He did the experiment. Students do it every year at universities around the country, around the world. You could do it. It's a perfectly valid experiment. It's based on a torsion balance system. The lengths of the rod with the sphere, the masses on the end, allow one to sort of amplify the effects of gravity because you're talking about a torque on an object at a lever arm, and so you can more readily discern minute changes in its position due to, say, a force of gravity acting on it from the other sphere. And the cool thing about it is it's measuring a horizontal gravitational force. So we have this pervasive gravitational force we're in. We can't escape, not practically anyways, and certainly not just to do this experiment. And so you want to sort of isolate the system from the ambient gravitational field of the Earth, which only acts up and down. It's a vertical thing exclusively. So there's zero gravity left or right, and so this torsion balance system attempts to isolate the system from the gravity that's already there that we can't escape in practice, certainly not in the 1700s, and measure real gravitational forces between objects with mass. So that's the long and short of it. And so it's an actual way you can measure the fact that gravity is real. We're not I don't know what else to say. I'll let you respond if you'd like.
So you said something. Where did you say the force of gravity was acting upon the Cavendish experiment?
So you have the force of gravity from the Earth pulling the masses straight down, and you have the
Right.
force of gravity from the spheres that are close together. See, it's a 1/r² thing. So you could be in the room and not adversely affect as long as you're not like cuddling it. Like if you're just a meter or a few meters away, is 1/r² is a pretty fast drop off, and since you are measuring a small force, you would have these spheres ideally pretty close together in the first place, and you can measure any deflections caused by their mutual attraction. They both will move, and you can
And then you
measure.
said something about there being, and then you said something about there being zero gravity at one point. What was that statement?
The zero gravity acting in the horizontal direction when you look at the gravitational field we're in from the Earth. That's essentially a purely vertical or radial force. It's a center-seeking force. So gravity doesn't act horizontally. It's a purely vertical thing.
Okay. All right. So what I'm understanding you to say is that the vertical action of gravity is acting upon the two balls hanging on the torsion bar. Yes.
From the Earth, yes.
Okay. And then you said that there's no horizontal force of gravity, correct?
From the Earth, right. Mm-hmm.
Okay. From the Earth. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And So my initial question was, what is okay? How have you measured